Hey, Clemson family, when Clemson and Florida State face on the football field, there is usually an ACC title at stake, or at least, you're thinking one of these teams is going to win it. I think that holds up again in 2024, and we will take a look.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge game in the ACC as always, and I think a big part of whether Clemson can win that game will be the position group we're going to talk about today, and if that group can really kind of step up and take the next step and be a big part of the defense.
Yep, and as the defensive ends, I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to the Reign Supreme All-Way podcast. We've done more than 100 of these suckers. We are in season 3, so to speak. We are glad you are here. We hope you're going to comment about your thoughts on Florida State and on this defensive end room that has changed so much at Clemson during the past offseason. We are at youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. We've been doing series all preseason, looking at each opponent, looking at each position group at Clemson. And you can go check out all those past episodes right there in our feed. So let's go ahead and get into Florida State because I live in Central Florida. I've lived most of my life in Central Florida or very near to Central Florida. And I have dealt with a lot of Florida State back and forth in my day, even though I'm not kind of the trash talking kind of fan or alum or what have you. And of course, some of that I guess goes back to what Daniel, you and I have been doing so long, which is journalism, which is be able to pull as much bias out of things as you can and recognize it. So I don't often get that approach returned when dealing with Florida State fans down here. So for me, it's a big game, but really for most people, it's a big game because these are two of the premier programs in the ACC football, and there is often a conference title berth at stake early on. And it sure turned out that last year, the winner of this game was the only one to move into the ACC conference game.
Well, and you look through the years at the top two teams in the ACC as far as trips to the ACC championship game are Clemson and Florida State. And, national champion, the only ACC teams to win a national championship in the playoff era. These two teams, right? So, it's a big game. It's not, the biggest rivalry on Clemson's schedule, but it might be the most important rivalry on Clemson's schedule as far as what Clemson's goals are at the end of the season. And Bill, that might even be more true now with an expanded 12-team playoff.
Yep. The ACC could and should get 2 teams, I think, into the playoff this year, especially once it expands to 14 down the road. But if there's a lot of committee leaning toward the power brokers of the sport, and the ACC right now is not one of them, it might be only a team that wins the conference that gets in. So, whoever loses this game could still reach the ACC championship game, unlike years past. And a lot of that has to do with, the disappearance of the division schedules. Florida State has come back into prominence, though, under head coach Mike Norvell in recent years. He has worked the transfer portal pretty hard. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Just a little bit, right? Just a little bit.
Yeah, he's done well for himself. He did well at Memphis before that, earned this job with a solid record, and has been 31-17 at Florida State since then. And did they go undefeated? Was there any buzz about that last year before they got to their bowl game? Yeah, they did, and they didn't make the playoff. That's how that worked. That's right.
Do you have your bowl of tears over there that you
I do not. I just
Okay.
have, it's been hot down here. A lot of them have evaporated, so I'm hoping
Okay.
this game will replenish that stock. Even the ones that generated Omaha just weren't the same. 9-0 ACC, 13-1 last season, and they are losing some talent from that team. A lot of talent. Starts on the defensive line with Jared Verse, and I'm blanking on the other defensive tackle who is out. But Patrick Payton is back, and Joshua Farmer is back, and those are 2 impact guys up front without a doubt.
It is, and they are, and this is a very talented team. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Mike Norvell, I mean, it's kind of, how do you get the talent these days? Is it recruiting? Is it portal? Is it whatever it is? You have the talent on your roster, and they have one of the most talented teams in college football. I don't think you can argue against that. I don't think you can deny that. But Bill, they lost so much talent. You mentioned Jared Verse, Braden Fisk. Braden Fisk
Thank you.
is the other defensive lineman.
Yep.
But you look at what they lost at wide receiver. You just look at all this talent that they lost off that team, and you say, can you replenish that? Well, that's the big question for this program. Other programs, you would say, okay, Georgia's lost a lot of talent or Bama's lost a lot of talent. Well, we've seen them the next wave up. We haven't seen that from Florida State yet, at least not this iteration of Florida State, this coaching staff, this current era of Florida State. So that's what you've got to see if they can do it. If they can, then my goodness, they're on the roll for something really big these next few years, because we've seen what this coaching staff can do with talent. Saw it last year. I still think they should have been in the playoff. I know you disagree. I think Mike is a heck of a coach. I also don't think that he wants to live in the portal every year the way they've had to these last couple of years, because I don't know that that's sustainable. Again, it's a new era. Maybe it is. 10 years from now, somebody can prove me wrong on that. I just think that college football, the lifeblood of it, is still going to be high school recruiting, and you sprinkle in them with the portal. They've had to be more aggressive the last few years because of the talent deficiency on the roster when they took over. Now they're starting to get out of that a little bit.
Yeah, one key addition is Marvin Jones Jr. out of Georgia. He will be at defensive end opposite Peyton. Jones checks in at 6'5", 257. He's a junior. 12 tackles last year is all he tallied at Georgia, and a sack, and that probably has a lot to do with why he decided to move on, although you would think he would have moved up as a starter and at least earned a lot more snaps for the Bulldogs this coming season. Peyton, 43 tackles last year, very disruptive. He's 6'5", 254. He had 7 sacks and 9 pass breakups for the Seminoles last year. So neither of those guys tops 260. Maybe they will by the start of the season, but not a lot of size at defensive end. Still very effective, certainly a lot of height. And then Farmer, 6'3", 318. That is a big dude capable of plugging the middle. 32 tackles last year, 5 sacks, so somewhat disruptive as well. Let's get into the linebackers, and that is a group that will be led by DJ Lundy. Checks in at 6'1", 240, almost as big as those ends. He's a senior, 54 tackles last year, a couple of sacks. He's going to be one of 2 new starters at linebacker, but much like we've said about Wade Woodaz and Clemson, Lundy, with those 54 tackles, certainly brings some experience to the table and is something of a known quantity, unlike some of these incoming transfers like Jones.
Well, and Lundy is one of the pieces that we're kind of talking about, right? Is he's had a role, he's played well, but now he's got to have a bigger role. And how will that transfer to this year's team? That he is one of the key players on this team. I think he's a really good player, but we've seen him as a really good player in a limited role. If he can carry that over and be the guy at linebacker, then that's a huge piece for the Seminoles coaching staff.
Yep. And then 3 starters will be back in the defensive backfield as well, led by a pair of corners. And that can't be great news for the Clemson Tigers, but hopefully the tape and the familiarity allows a little bit of Garrett Riley exploitation perhaps to come about. And Clemson moved the ball well for the most part against the Seminoles last year. Azariah Thomas with 29 tackles last year. Fentrell Cypress II, I think maybe a little bit of a bigger name, but he had 40 tackles last year. That doesn't always jump out and say, you don't really want a corner making more tackles. So between Thomas and Cypress, however, a very good duo back there.
And they are. And I love Thomas. I know like you said, Cypress might be the bigger name. I think Thomas is as underrated in the ACC as anybody in the conference as a defensive back.
Yeah. Work cut out for Cade Klubnik and that receiver core that we talked about in a recent episode, youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. You can go find it. Talking about the Seminoles receivers, a lot of turnover there. They were very dependent on Keon Coleman last year. He was kind of quiet most of that game until Nate Wiggins got hurt at the end, and then Coleman was able to make that winning catch against Clemson in overtime. Hakeem Williams is a rising sophomore for the Seminoles. Not a didn't make a big impact last year, but he is 6'2", 210, and that kind of gives you a little bit of a Johnny Wilson vibe about him, maybe. And then Malik Benson comes in from Alabama, a transfer, 6'1", 190. He's a senior. You've also got Ja'Kai Douglas as a returning senior for the Seminoles, 5'9", 199, so a little bit smaller target, but kind of thick at 5'9" to be checking at 199. And then another transfer, a little bit of a wild card, if you will, a speedster who comes in from LSU, Jalen Brown, 6'1", 172, so he's got nice height to go with that speed. He played 3 games at LSU and did not record any stats, so you just don't know what's going to become of that. You would think at this point in the season, though, playing Clemson in week 6, that the Seminoles will have some hierarchy to their targets and how they like to try to set up their progressions in the passing game.
Well, I mean, look, there's so much new. By this time, they're not really new. We see it. We hear it all the time. Coaches say, oh, he's not a freshman anymore. So these guys will be settled into roles by the time Clemson goes to Tallahassee. But it's Bill, this is one of the key positions to me for Florida State, is how much they lost from last year's team. Can they replicate that with someone else? There was so much production with Keon Coleman and some other pieces there. Can they match that this year? That's going to play a big part in whether or not Florida State can kind of hide the year that a lot of people think it can.
Yeah, one area where Mike Norvell has done really, really well, and it was one of the things on his resume as he left Memphis, he has rebuilt this offensive line, and he has got 3 starters coming back this year. They are led by all ACC left tackle Darius Washington, a 6'4", 310 mountain of a senior.
And you know how much we think about offensive line. If you've listened to us before, we talk about it. Remember, we talked about NC State's offensive line, how good it's going to be with 4 starters back. You know, you can have a bad group and they're all back, and you say, well, we've got a bunch of starters back. Well, how good are they? That's not the case here with Florida State. Their offense is going to start up front, which most do, and they have a big piece with Washington, a couple other starters back, and they should be able to continue to roll along on offense. I don't have a whole lot of questions as far as, you know, schematically what they're going to do offensively, and it starts up front. It's just whether or not their receivers can match up to what they had in the past. And I know we'll talk about it in just a minute, what they can do at quarterback.
Yeah, and it's going to be important, I think, for the front 6 of the Clemson Tigers. I used to be front 7, but now they play that 4-2-5 more often than anything else. I think this year they need to be a little more disruptive. Last year they were disruptive at times, but they also had to respect that scrambling ability of Jordan Travis and make sure that they kept contained and make sure that they kept him hemmed in, and they did a very nice job of that for most of the game. It needs to be a little bit more aggressive perhaps this year and get in their new quarterback's face, because we have seen what can happen when he is disrupted. But first, let's talk about the running back, Lawrence Toafili. A lot of buzz about this guy. Not big numbers for him as he's coming back. He's 6'0", 196. He's a senior, 69 carries last year for 463 yards and 4 touchdowns. He kind of was the secondary back. I wouldn't say he was a total backup. There was some rotation a little bit there. He got good steady carries. Toafili doesn't necessarily. He's not Dalvin Cook, right? He's got the ability to do a lot of things and a lot of things well, and he will need to be able to complement that new quarterback. Go ahead, and I'll let you chime in on Florida State's running back situation before we get to that familiar quarterback.
Yeah, we might have a lot to say about that, right? I was just going to say real quickly that Toafili feels a lot like Lundy, right? He's had a role. Now he's going to have a bigger role. Will that translate to the bigger role? And obviously he won't be everything's on him back. They're going to have other guys in the mix too, but he's going to have a bigger role. Will that translate? We'll have to find out.
Yeah, and certainly you and I are comparing him to Lundy, but I would bet Seminoles fans are comparing him more to Peyton and expecting that kind of disruption when he carries the ball, like Peyton is able to disrupt the opposition when he's pursuing the ball. So there's that quarterback. Let's see if we remember how to say it. DJ Uiagalelei.
I think
He
you
is
got it.
he's 6'4", 255. He's a graduate. Got that sheepskin at Clemson, and last year, 180 of 315 for 2,638 yards. Did a nice job improving his touchdown to interception ratio, 21 TDs against 7 picks. He will be wearing number 4. I guess he's Big Quattro now. It's just hard to see him bringing that same offensive jolt that Jordan Travis did. And we saw what happened when the Seminoles lost Travis late in the year. They struggled to beat a mediocre Florida team that is not up to its previous reputation. They struggled against Louisville, which really kind of faded late in the year. Louisville was earning a lot of headlines for most of the season, but then kind of faded late, and Florida State struggled to get past them. That is why I believe I hope it's not my bias. I just look at the product that they were able to offer the playoff committee at the end of the season without Jordan Travis, and you look at the quality of all 4 teams that made the playoff. You can't argue that Florida State should have bounced one of those with a backup quarterback coming in. So we will see what Uiagalelei can do for this offense. We'll also see how the coaching staff handles such a different set of quarterbacking skills that he brings to the table compared to Jordan Travis.
I can argue Florida State should have been in, and I think we have done that before. So I think they should have been in. But we'll move on from that. That's 9 months ago, or will be 9 months ago by the time Clemson plays Florida State. Look, DJ had a pretty good year at Oregon State, but Bill, I mean, if you look at his stats at Clemson and at Oregon State,
Yes.
just look at 2022. He threw for 2,500 yards, 21 yards, right? He completed 61% of his passes, 22 touchdowns, 7 picks. Last year, 57% of his passes, 2,600 yards, 21 touchdowns, 7 picks. His quarterback rating went up, if you believe in those kinds of things, 135 to 145. But when it was a very similar season for him at Oregon State, where, you know, maybe early he padded the numbers a little bit, and then when things got a little bit tougher, the completion percentage went down, the decision making went down, holding the ball too long, not being able to fit the ball in tight windows. And look, we love him as a young man, and I think he's a talent. We saw that his freshman year. My gosh, you thought, oh, he's Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, boom, Clemson's gonna plug DJU in, and then it just never translated after that for whatever reason. Do they have the kind of talent around him at Florida State to help him take the next step? We'll have to find out. Oregon State was a much more defensive team than an offensive team. And I think that, you know, can Florida State give him the kind of weapons around him? Their recruiting class is really good, right? They've been really good in the portal. So that's going to be the key. What's around him as opposed to it being all on him. If it's all on him, I think Florida State's going to have some problems. But if he can work the ball to some really talented players around him, they're going to be really good.
Did we mention? I don't think we did. Uiagalelei, Big Quattro now, still easier to pronounce, on his 4th offensive coordinator in the last 4 seasons. And that is, to me, a part of it with him. Now, we've also heard him. He is very much a student of the game. He's able to break down scenarios. He was at Clemson. He understood. You'd hear certain clips. I think we imported one into the podcast at one point where he was just talking about the progressions he had to go through, the pre-snap looks that he had to have, the matchups that he could take away from those things, and he is able to do those things. But when it's 4 coordinators in 4 years, does it always click as immediately once you're out there on the field and facing pressure? And quite frankly, when he faces pressure from the opposing defense, that is when things start to break down a little bit for him. Thus my comment earlier that front 4, the linebackers, whoever you might bring on the secondary, Khalil Barnes, RJ Mickens, we've seen guys at the safety position, work their way through, and make tackles for loss in the backfield. If you disrupt DJU, that's kind of the key for this game to maybe give Klubnik a chance to sort of take over, work some possession offense, work those long methodical drives, and then maybe some big strikes are going to become more part of the Clemson offense this year. DJ is not the only question that you have, though, just like you mentioned, like transfer. How many did we mention up and down this list? And they do have some core guys back. I'm looking at the 5 names right there on the screen. That's almost half your defense. You are going to have some guys coming in, though, from outside. Jones is a heck of a pedigree coming from Georgia, but what's that fit going to be like? How is he going to feel out on the field? Mike Norvell has done a pretty good job of managing that in the past, but it's always a question mark. Is this group going to be the same as the others? And a lot of these transfers aren't second or third year guys like they were last year. They are brand new to the program.
Well, and you see 2 totally different approaches to the portal, right? And so for Florida State, it has worked. For Clemson, it hasn't worked like it had before. So I won't say it hasn't worked. They still won 9 games last year. They still went to the ACC championship game 2 years ago. So they're what, 130, 120 probably teams in FBS who would have loved to have the year that Clemson had last year. Yeah. Florida State's not one of them. Florida State had a better year. I think they have a great roster, but it's, Bill, again, it's a lot of new. And, what we were saying there too about DJ, at least in my mind, is not a shot at DJ.
Right.
It's what was Jordan Travis to this team and how important he was to this team and to this roster. We saw it game after game after game last year. Clemson fans saw it firsthand, what he meant to this Florida State football team and that roster. We saw it against LSU in the opener, right, on Labor Day night last year. So do they change the offense, or do they expect DJ to be that? Because I don't think DJ is that.
No.
And again, not a shot. I don't know how many guys are that. Jordan Travis had a special season last year. Will that be the same what they're expecting of DJ? There was a lot on Jordan Travis's shoulders last year. A lot. And I don't know that DJ can do all the things that Jordan Travis did. If he does, then Florida State's going to have a great year. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yep. And look, DJ can extend plays. He's a different style of runner, but he does a nice job extending plays. We showed the stats. You mentioned the previous stats. We know he's capable. It's a different skill set, and that's what Florida State has to assimilate. I don't think it's necessarily a lesser skill set. It's just how is it going to fit is a question mark, and it may fit very well. It may match up very well against Clemson if the Tigers defense doesn't clean up some of the tackling issues that you saw sporadically with the Tigers last year. They've got to be on point with a much larger guy that they got to bring down for sure. So I think everybody's going to tune into that one. That should be a primetime game in Tallahassee. That could be quite a setting for the game, and it's going to be a challenge for the Tigers. Both sides of the ball, the Seminoles are capable. It's just a matter of how capable this year. YouTube.com/Clemson Kickoff. You can go back and find all the nice things that we have said about DJ Uiagalelei through the years. Let's get into another position. You talk about having to work with some different skill sets. It's Clemson's defensive ends coming into 2024. And come on, there we go. So you look at this group opening up the year, a lot of turnover, having lost last year's 2 primary starters in Xavier Thomas, who I think had a nice following among the fans, and in Justin Maskell, who finally, as Dabo Swinney likes to say, flipped the switch, became a more complete ball player. Of course, we saw TJ Parker emerge, and he is going to man one of those starting spots. But when you get past the top maybe 3 guys in this room, they're thin on experience and they're thin on depth.
They are. It's going to be a different looking group this year, and kind of like what we were saying with Florida State's defensive line, new roles for guys. TJ Parker had a great year last year, but now teams are going to go into the season saying, "Where's TJ Parker? right? He's wearing number 3 now. Maybe that helps him hide a little bit as opposed to 12 last year. But they are going to scheme for TJ Parker. So a different role for him. I think he's ready for it. And we'll find out, who else kind of has a role in this group with the defensive ends. But it is definitely going to take on a new look. I mean, Bill, my goodness, how many years did Xavier Thomas play with Clemson? 6 years.
Yeah.
It definitely is going to have a new look without him on the roster.
It's going to have a thicker look on one side, Peter Woods, and I'm very excited about Peter Woods moving outside. I was kind of hoping to see it. I also had talked about, would they ever try Caden Story out there? He's going to move out there as well and work out at the very least. We'll see if he can get on the field. Woods, though, is earning a lot of accolades. One Pro Football Focus analyst on Twitter, X, I guess it's supposed to be, was talking about he is going to be a star on the outside. And that's fine to believe that for the 6'2", 315 sophomore, that he's going to play well, but you can't assume it. You've got to see it. He's going to have a big test to open the season against Georgia.
He is, and he's a big piece of the puzzle. I mean, he's as big of a piece of the puzzle as there is on the team. He might be the most important player on the team going into this season as we talk about position groups and there are other ones out there, but he's as important to this team's success, I think, as anybody on the roster.
Yep. And if you want experience, go to the coach in the room, Chris Rumph, because he brings a ton of it from the NFL and from the college scenes alike. He knows how to get this room into shape. Some of the players have already talked about the different tone in the room. Maybe you don't need as much of Nick Eason kind of working with both the tackles and the ends as there was some chatter about last year. Rumph can certainly get on these guys, let them know what they need to do. We've seen one guy transfer out already because of it. Hadn't been at Clemson but a few months when he decided to go. The new Josh Belk, I guess you could say. Rumph is bringing it, and if this room is going to improve, I think that's the kind of effort you have to have from the coach.
Well, I think Rumph is a lot like Eason, right? Coached in the NFL, has that panache a little bit of like, I know what it takes to get you to the NFL. I know what it takes to be a pro. And he's probably not going to accept anything less than that. I love the hire. It kind of surprised me when they made it. He had been at Clemson before, more than a decade ago. It's been a while, but to see him come back, I think was a really good boost for that defensive staff.
Yep. And then you wonder, will his addition, as well as the personnel being very different this year than it's been in several years, will there be any changes? And that I'm just going to leave that as kind of an open-ended question. We'll move along. Obviously, they didn't show their cards during the spring game, but I'm going to be interested. All right, I don't think you can drop Peter Woods into coverage. I think Christian Wilkins maybe could have done a little bit of that, not a lot, not something you want to see against Trevor Etienne for sure. So let's see what kind of changes can be made, though, especially now that it's 4-2-5. Maybe you got some 3-down lineman sets where Woods is out there at end. He's going to have to assimilate a lot, and we will see just how often they're asking some of these younger, less experienced guys to drop back. Maybe they'll be able to pin their ears back instead a little bit and make sure they set the edge and work on getting into the backfield. I mentioned flip the switch like Justin Maskell was able to last year. I think Cade Denoff is the guy who has to do that this year.
I agree, and I think he's ready for it. It just feels like to me that how many of these guys have we seen at Clemson the last few years? And obviously Maskell is the most recent case of that, where Dabo says they're not microwave ready. They've got to cook a little bit. They got to marinate. And I think he's a guy that can really help this team, especially Bill. There's an opportunity there. Like we talked about, there's not much depth or experience at defensive end. So there is an opportunity there that maybe wasn't there these last couple of years. So I think this is a big chance for him to step up.
I think another guy who sees the opportunity is AJ Hoffler, judging by his performance in that spring game. And the offensive line still kind of taking form under Matt Luke. Maybe he was able to exploit some mistakes that a team like Florida State or a team like Georgia might not offer up on a platter that maybe we saw during the spring game. but Hoffler sure looks like he wants to make his presence felt. And if that gives you a true two deep between Parker and Woods, Denoff and Hoffler, what a difference that makes for this room, even compared to last year.
It does, and it's look. I think that with that four, I think you got a pretty solid start, and I really want to see what Peter Woods can be on the outside.
Yeah,
like you talked about there a little bit before. So that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle.
absolutely. It's a question mark though, but there's reason for optimism. You've got some guys in the shadows too, who we discussed last year. They're all waiting to take the next step still. Jaheim Lawson, Armin Mason, Zaire Patterson. None are particularly hefty. All have earned praise from Dabo Swinney at one time or another, and we will see if they can find a way to contribute. And then you get into the lone freshmen. I mentioned that they did have a transfer out at this group in the spring. So Darian Mayo is there to add the youth and potential as far as depth goes. Let's get to the star of the group, though, and that clearly is TJ Parker, who just absolutely was. I've said it before, I'll say it again, a revelation for Clemson at defensive end last year. It was very much needed. You couldn't expect Maskell and Thomas to just work every snap, every game. And Parker was not only effective, he had some real standout moments. So we'll see what he can do in his sophomore year, maybe improve somehow, some way.
Yeah, look, I had expectations for him in his freshman year. I didn't have that as an expectation. I was blown away by TJ Parker. Just loved his game, loved his motor, loved how he got after the offense. If he progresses from that, I mean, watch out. My goodness. I mean, he could really be something special. Now, again, teams are going to know who he is going into the season. They are going to scheme for him. They're going to come up to the line of scrimmage looking for him. Maybe having Peter Woods on the other end helps that. I think having the two defensive tackles who will start is going to be a big piece of that puzzle to help him out. I don't think you can really double team him with the defensive line that they've got, planned for as a starting group. So that'll help him as well. But I'm expecting another good jump from TJ Parker. Really excited to see what he's going to be.
A lot of optimism, but we've only got a couple minutes left here. Is this the biggest question mark on the defensive unit? Because all the other spots in this unit seem to be loaded.
I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say that it's going to be a really good group, but there are some unknowns, and that's there are unknowns of Peter Woods moving outside full time. There's unknowns of TJ being the guy. There's unknowns of Denoff and Hoffler. There's unknowns of Lawson, Mason, Patterson. So there are some unknowns, but I don't think they're like you go into the season worried about it because the talent is there. And I think we've seen that the work ethic is there too.
And certainly the coach that they brought in, if they were going to decide to make a change, I think it was a home run hire.
Yes.
Almost along the lines of Nick Eason being such a home run hire at defensive tackle. And I do love that you brought up that the tackles are going to be such a factor in the performance of the defensive ends. I don't think it's just the two starters. I think you can go almost three deep at defensive tackle, maybe literally three deep at defensive tackle and be just fine. You've got 5 or 6 guys there who are all just incredibly capable of making an impact on the field and in ways that allow the linebackers to do their jobs and not have to try to overperform, to allow defensive ends to make sure they set the edge before they say, hey, you know what, this is a pursued opportunity, I'm going to take it. They don't have to get up to the line thinking, oh, do I have to sit back? No, they can allow that play to develop the way they need to. And I think once again, Chris Rumph will be able to make the most of the talent that he's got there, to the point where if this is the worst group on the field for the Clemson defense, they should be just fine. A lot of national analysts looking at Clemson as a top 5, top 10 defense for the nation. And there's certainly reason to believe that they can live up to that billing. YouTube.com/Clemson kickoff. If anything breaks amid all these off-season previews, we will sure bring you that. I think we've managed to mix in a few breaking topics here and there. I think there's going to be opportunity for that. Until our next episode, comment on this one, and I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.